All right, welcome back to Munro Live, everyone. My name is Tyler Schlink. I've been an associate for 5+ years. With me today is Nakesha Granberry. She has a background in textile and material sciences, and I believe before her role here at Munro, she was a lead cost engineer with General Motors. So extensive background in cut and sew. Glad to have her on the team, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. We have the Rivian front seats in front of us, the passenger seat, and of course the driver's seat beginning to be torn down. Now, a little overview on seats just to kind of level set everyone on here. Seats are not an insignificant cost item in a vehicle. Front seats, each one can range anywhere from $300 to $500. Under $300 would be a relatively cheap seat. Over $500 would be a relatively expensive seat. Me and Nakesha kind of come from an interiors, more plastics background, and sometimes it doesn't get as much love as, say, the powertrain or the outside look of a body of a car, but it is important to know that, just as an example, the Chrysler Pacifica, the new Chrysler Pacifica minivan, all 3 rows in that vehicle, all 3 rows of those seats cost more than the powertrain itself, and that includes drive shafts, half shafts, transmission, engine, all of it. The seats cost more than that. So OEMs spend a significant amount of time and money on these components, and they're kind of near and dear to what we work on since we're not so much structural or powertrain type people. So for a general breakdown of cost of a typical seat, about 50 to 70%, just over half, is usually all the inside structure and inner workings. The skeleton, the EE components, the ventilation, the heating, that's a majority of the seat cost. Once you get to the top hat, only about 20 to 25% cost is the actual outside soft touch material itself.
So Tyler, do you know how long it takes to sew a trim cover?
I don't. I have a background in automated soft touch components, but not actual like laborious cut and sew. So enlighten us. I actually don't know how long it takes to do one of these.
So usually for trim, a seat back alone, it's like 68 minutes total for cut and sew. And then for the cushion, it's like 56 minutes.
So when you say the cut and sew, you're talking just all the vinyl and the leather being essentially put together like this, not even assembled on the seat yet. It takes an hour.
An hour.
And is that a parallel process?
It is.
So it's not like do one takes an hour, serial do another, and it takes 2 hours. So a parallel process, both can be done within 1 hour. But that an hour is a lot of labor time.
And it is.
For sure, especially if you're doing 60,000+ seats a year.
Correct.
That is, so while this might only be 20% of the cost of a seat, that's just material cost then.
Right.
The actual labor time, which is obviously charged at maybe a different rate, is much more significant than I thought.
Exactly. Just like here, if you see on the ACE surface, you can tell the stitching that's on here, the style line, and the decorative stitching here that's in the insert. And then you will see overall, majority of it is the deck seam all over the trim cover. And then once you flip it over on the B side, you pretty much can see what is captured on the seat. You have your 3D mesh, your Velcro, your wire frame with the hog rings, and usually with hog rings, we usually use a hand tool, operator use a hand tool to snap the hog rings together. So that's pretty much what we use for assemble.
Those hog rings, that would definitely be considered a more traditional method of installing a cut and sew cover onto a seat cushion, correct?
Correct.
Because we do have, in preparation for this video, 2 more modern examples. Now, both of these are Teslas, but we've seen these same strategies in many other vehicles in the industry, not just Tesla. One example of maybe a more modern approach, other than having to actually physically bend metal hog rings on there, this would be plastic kind of snap fit compression fittings. That's what you see, the orange pieces there. And this plastic piping, instead of using a hog ring, would actually just snap fit into those components and lock them into place, which I can imagine is a much quicker labor time. The Mach-E also uses hog rings, so it's not that uncommon for the Rivian to do it, but we have seen other methods. And then maybe even one of my most favorite and efficient methods would be something you see on the Tesla Model S, which is using Velcro. So the blue you see there is actually Velcro, and instead of like a plastic piping, you would have a fibrous kind of material that can stick down in there, and the Velcro can grab onto it. So those are two maybe more modern methods than the traditional hog ring method you're showing here.
That is correct. And we also have the J retainers. This is what we use when it comes to building the trim cover on the seat frame. So as you can see, they're all over the edge of the trim cover. And this is what we use. Now, this fabric loop, it helps support when we wrap this trim cover around the seat frame. So this is a good support.
So it gives you some leverage for the operators to actually stretch that fabric around and lock it onto the frame.
Correct, because most seat
I don't
covers,
normally see that too
that
often.
is correct.
Like, this is, once again, I just happen to have the Tesla over here, but I've looked at plenty of seat covers. You don't always see those blue straps there. So that is a nice little feature that it looks like the Rivian seat covers have added for the operators. Kind of, I know when you're trying to grab this with your fingers and pull tight, it can actually be hard to do.
Which is a cost savings. The strips here is a potential for other seats that we...
Yeah, the little money you're spending to add them in there speeds up assembly time, which ultimately saves you cost down the road.
Sure.
Agreed, for sure. So now, since you have more of a cut and sew background and kind of recognize different materials, is this a whole seat vinyl, since you were kind of the one that tore this down, or is there differences in materials throughout here?
There's differences in material. Currently, this on the A surface, you can see this is leather perforated, and the other material is more of a vinyl.
So the middle insert, which once again isn't uncommon to have the middle insert be actual leather, but not the outside. And that's likely just due to cost differences. I believe leather can be upwards of 3 times the cost per square meter of typical vinyl. So if this is all vinyl, if you were to do the same exact section out of leather, you could pay 3 times as much. So if you paid $10 per square meter for vinyl, and I'm just kind of making up somewhat accurate numbers here, $10 per square meter on vinyl, if this was leather, it could be $35 per square meter. And especially even more if it's perforated, which the inside is. And those perforations are there for, of course, airflow for ventilation, but that adds significant cost to the roll as well, just for a secondary process of adding those in. Now, I noticed that the backing material on the leather inserts looks different than the backing material, say, on all this vinyl stuff. What would that be?
Right. As I said earlier, we in between the insert leather perforated, there is a 3D mesh in between that, and then the scrim is on the back of it.
And that is that for like support because maybe it's weakened with the perforations?
It is a support, and also if you look at the foam, this is where our heat element, the heating pad element. So this actually ties into this insert.
Gotcha. For the heating element, for of course the ventilation, I'm sure it's breathable, so
correct,
air can flow through it.
Yes.
Understood. So anyway, moving on. So we got leather, we got vinyl. The only other like major material difference I see here is
Duon.
Like this stuff.
Yes.
What's that called?
Duon.
Duon material.
Yes.
From what I've heard, I'm pretty sure this is about like as cheap as it gets, right? This type of material, like this compared to the vinyl and leather, this doesn't cost anything.
Right, correct. And if you can tell, it has the retention strips. So what that means is it actually helps support when it comes to wrapping the seat trim cover into the frame.
Now, the main purpose of using Duon, that would be, if I were to take an educated guess, so this is all hidden material, right? And so you don't want to waste money making this all out of vinyl if no one's going to see it. So it's actually cheaper overall to spend the time to cut this material out, spend for the scrap of all this extra material, and actually sew it to the vinyl to use it, than to just use a bigger vinyl sheet. It's actually cheaper.
It is.
To do that method. Okay, so you do see this Duon material on the back, kind of B surface hidden type areas on a seat. So just so.
Right, and as you can see on the seat here,
yeah,
the Duon actually support it because you can tell by the shape of the seat trim cover, it's actually pulling back so it could support the design here and around the seat trim cover.
And then
So
the plastic here would
Right.
kind of cover it up. Now,
which you won't see any gaps because it's pulled all the way back.
I understood. So actually, I believe you found something. So Carl did a video on these seats, at least from an interior standpoint, and he called these out as hard plastic that he thought had a soft touch paint. But you were the one that tore these seats down recently, and I think you found that Carl was wrong on his initial assumption.
Yes, so pretty much this is a plastic panel, which is a PC, AB.
Likely PC, ABS,
yep, ABS.
Because you don't have to flame treat it in order for the adhesive to stick to it to wrap stuff.
Right, but it's actually wrapped with vinyl. So what happens is that the operator, they would spray the solvent-based adhesive on here, and we will use a heat gun and a hand tool, which is called the bone tool. And what you would do is just take the vinyl. Once you use a handgun, you wrap the vinyl on the panel, flip it back on the B surface, and edge wrap. But only thing about this section, you need a brush. There's a brush tool for you to brush the solvent-based adhesive on here. And
so manually apply it for the edge wrapping.
Edge wrapping, yes.
And I've seen some of these. I haven't worked a whole lot with them, but I've seen them in the factory. So this would actually indicate that this whole thing was sprayed, the sprayed solvent-based adhesive. But you're saying on the line, you then have to manually add that same adhesive that the operator does to wrap this stuff around?
Yes.
That seems fun. So it's not fully automated in that aspect. Now, is this stuff, like, is it sticky to work with? Like, would your hands get covered in glue while you're working with this?
Well, first off, with the operators, they always wear gloves.
Okay.
And use, when they're wrapping, with either the bone tool or needle nose pliers, they always just use the tool to pull around and shape wherever the vinyl is supposed to be wrapped.
But I guess my question would be, the heat, is it activated by the heat?
It's activated by the heat.
Because right now it's just kind of dry to the touch. If we were to put a heat gun on there, it would reactivate?
It will, yes.
Okay, so I could actually technically use this part with gloves on and not worry about having glue technically all over my fingers until I apply the heat gun.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I would imagine that would be a very messy process if it didn't work that way.
Right. So in the corners area, this is when you would use the needle nose pliers.
Okay.
You definitely need that to make sure you have a clean sleeve around the edges in the corner. Because that's the only way that you'll be able to assemble to the seat frame, as long as everything is clean and wrapped around correctly, and you would avoid gaps.
Gotcha.
So that's
well,
the
if
purpose
Carl
of it.
thought this was actually an injection molding that was spray painted soft touch, that must mean whoever did this did a very good job, because when something's injection molded and the grain's done in the tool, it can look about as perfect as you can make it. But when you actually wrap something, there's distortions that happen in the grain of the material at some of these corners. And you don't really see any. So this was wrapped extremely well for someone like Carl to think that it wasn't, that it was actually an injection molded plastic piece while it was on the vehicle. So
I agree.
Kudos to the team
Yes.
there at Rivian.
Now, I must say that in past wrappings that I had myself, I tried to use a leather with the plus pad, and it didn't go too well because you saw a lot of extra material and wrinkles. So this is the perfect material to use for this panel here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree.
Very good. So moving on to some elements I know nothing about, stitching. Now, is there a difference between like functional stitching that you see in the corners and maybe some of these more decorative geometrical stitching patterns here?
Yes, so usually the standard for stitching, it would be between 5 to 6 stitch per inch. And that's the normal. But anything above 6 stitch per inch, it could cause wear and tear.
So you're saying the number of actual stitches per inch,
Yes.
That's a controlled like standard in the industry. Now, is that for like wear and tear on like assembly or wear and tear on like daily use of the vehicle?
Daily use of the vehicle.
So getting in and out, so if you had more stitches per inch, would it not be as tolerable? Is that kind of what?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay, understood. And now, are these hand sewn? typically? Or is there any sort of like automated robotic technology to do this type of stuff?
Well, there's automatic. It depends on the actual component.
Okay.
But for here, this is automated, yes.
So all the stitches would be done automated throughout this?
For automated, just the top stitching here. But for the sew operator,
okay.
Yep, this is what the deck
the
feed.
main and then the main panels here would be manually done, but any sort of decorative stitch would have an automated situation.
Yes.
Actually, yeah, for the first time, if you get up here close, Eric, you can actually see there's about 4 stitches that overlap each other. So that's got to be extremely precise for, so yeah, I'm guessing definitely a robot or something. It starts this stitch and then ends it in the same spot. That'd be very difficult for an operator to do on this many and to not make a mistake and kind of scrap a whole leather section. So.
And then with the automated stitching, it saved more time because for an operator to do it,
yes.
I'm sure it'd be more because they have to do a lot of movement, the gravity, and complex motion. So it would be a lot of
that totally
time.
makes
Yeah.
sense. So that basically covers most of the cut and sew top hat pieces. As we dive down further into the seat, the next thing below that would be the polyurethane foams, which I think we have this one right here. Now, I've talked about polyurethane foams in previous videos, basically chemical reaction, a thermoset reaction, polyols and isocyanates come together and cure up in a tool, and you can kind of make whatever shapes you want. This is the same material that like mattresses would be made out of. Nothing really unique necessarily about this one. When we talk about polyurethane foams, the only thing relatively unique in the industry as of late is something that maybe Ford's been doing for the last 10 years. Their dark gray polyurethane here is actually a soy-based polyurethane. That means the normally like polyether polyols that they would use is a soy-based polyol, which is a renewable organic polyol that they use. I don't think that's what's going on here in Rivian, but when it comes to foams, that's about the only thing interesting we can talk about. When I flip this over, I see a blue color. I've seen different colors on foams before, but I haven't really worked a whole lot with them. Do you know what the colors are on the back of these foams?
Yes, so for this blue color, it's actually the solvent-based adhesive release from the molding, so that's where it came from. Correct.
Okay,
that's where it came
that
from.
Makes sense. That makes sense. And then on the back of these, they sometimes have kind of like a scrim pattern. It's covered up in the blue here, but it'd just be like a white fabric material, and that's usually probably for BSR, buzz, squeak, rattle, so it doesn't like squeak against the metal frame. Nothing really crazy unique. They did put injection molded plastic in here that they overmolded against. But probably the most significant part of the video that we'll talk about here today is in kind of opening up a little bit about Rivian's strategy. The first time I saw this, I think I knew right away who's making this seat. But I also have the benefit of having stickers on the bottom of the seat that tell me who the supplier is. Hyundai Transys is the supplier of these seats. That is a vertically integrated supplier of the Hyundai Motor Company. They're a seat supplier that anyone can use, but seeing this integrated air diffuser is something I've seen on recent Hyundais and Kias that we've torn apart. I believe the Kia Telluride had something similar to this. So the moment I saw that, I kind of, even if I didn't have labels, that would kind of give away that Hyundai Transys is making these seats. Now I don't know to what level Rivian's involvement is with some of the top hat elements. Maybe they're using Hyundai to build just the structure, and then they kind of do all the top hat stuff themselves. Maybe Hyundai Transys is doing the whole seat and shipped right to the factory. But that is an interesting thing to know. I know there's a lot of different strategies out there. You know, Tesla likes to do a lot of their JIT assembly in-house. Many suppliers like Ford has designed their own seat structures and frames and then farms it out to suppliers and says, this is what you have to build for us. Hyundai Transys has actually been making very nice seats for Kia, Hyundai, and Genesis as of late. And there's some pretty cool technologies they're throwing in here. So cool to me, at least, maybe not to the general public. That is an integrated air diffuser, as I mentioned recently. So when you do ventilation in a seat, of course, you need a blower motor, and you need to have that air travel through a diffuser and kind of have channels to exit out the seat. Normally you'd use maybe like a injection molded diffuser or a knit webbing diffuser. We could probably throw a picture up of a knit webbing diffuser, or even a blow molded version of this. What Hyundai Transys has been doing on some of their Kias and Hyundais lately are an integrated diffuser. So since you're already paying for a polyurethane mold anyway, you basically can make whatever shapes you want. So they've been integrating those channels already into the foam molding and then just closing it out with either a die cut foam scrim, or I've even seen on a Kia Telluride just a plastic adhesively applied closeout that even the ducting could snap right into. But it's nice to not have to pay for that separate part that you then assemble into the seat, but take advantage of the mold and the shapes you can make with the mold and just kind of close it out with something. And you're essentially getting rid of a paid-for plastic part by integrating it. So the moment I saw that, I probably could have told you this was being made by Hyundai and Kia, since that's a cool strategy they've been using as of late. Another cool strategy they've been using with heated and ventilated seats is the reduction of the actual ventilation motors. So normally, on a ventilated seat, you would have a dedicated motor that blows air through a duct up to the cushion seat. Then you'd have another motor just like this up on the seat back frame. So you'd have two motors, each one dedicated to blowing air out the cushion or the seat back. On the recent Hyundai and Kia seats, we see what's a dual outlet motor strategy. So slightly more expensive motor, but they're able to blow air in two directions through two different ductworks. And of course, you have to consider how you design your back frame and how you design your foam molding. But essentially, that ducting just runs up. I'll grab the piece so you can see. You pay a little bit more for a corrugated ducting that runs up, of course. Then that just snaps right into the back of the foam. Good to go. So one motor, and I'm just going to make up numbers here. If you normally would spend $10 to $15 per motor, maybe instead of paying for two $10 to $15 motors, you pay for one slightly more expensive motor, maybe a $13 motor with a dual outlet and a little bit more inducting, and you get the same functional performance for the customer. We just call that essentially good engineering here at Munro & Associates. So Nakesha and I are kind of more top-level plastics, top hat type people, so we won't get too much into any more of the structure. But if there's one thing that maybe kind of tells the story of this seat, is just kind of one part in general. I think it's a small snippet, but I think it kind of tells the whole story. Right here we see is the lumbar on a Ford Mach-E. Very simple spring suspension that just uses a wire cable to essentially squeeze this into like a U shape to give you more or less lumbar. It's about the cheapest way you can do a lumbar setup. Now what we see here on the Rivian is kind of like a four-way, two-motor electric setup. Goes up and down, uses the threaded rods to kind of bend in and out so you can have lumbar not only adjust in and out, but in the Z direction height as well. These two components, I think, really are a good example of this seat as a whole. Rivian did not spare any expense that I can see just on the outside looking in. There's storage containers that you'll probably see all over the internet. These are in lieu of getting rid of a glove box compartment. Plenty of plastics that you normally don't see wrapped all the way around. Of course, they then had to add extra steel components behind that to support all that. They throw decorative plastics and chrome everywhere, different fabrics. They spared no expense on the seats, and this lumbar is just one tiny little example of that. And I think really, at the end of the day, that is the whole story of these Rivian seats. I think they wanted to focus on the customer. I think there's areas that you can definitely cost cut for sure, and maybe those will come down the road. Maybe some efficiencies can be realized. But for the first kick at the cat, they definitely did not want to take the cost-efficient route. They wanted to give the customer everything, and I think they did that. I think they're wonderful seats, and I think that's just tells the story in general. Now, I think that's about all we have today. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this channel. Thank you to Sandy for letting Nakesha and I step away from the desk and do these types of videos. It's very fun for us. We are regular old office workers, so we have the 9-to-5 grind like anyone else, and this is a little bit of time to break away from that. But if you haven't subscribed already, please do, because it helps us become more popular. It helps us, me and Nakesha and everyone at this company, get to do videos like this, and it's really fun, and I appreciate you all watching. Hopefully you learned something.